Across millions of acres of boreal forest, something is building that fire scientists have been quietly dreading for years. Canada has already lived through what were once considered generational wildfire seasons. Smoke that turned New York's skyline orange, evacuation orders that emptied entire towns, air quality warnings that stretched from Alberta to the Atlantic coast. But the people who study fire behavior for a living are now saying something that should stop anyone in a fire-prone region in their tracks. The worst of it may not be behind us. It may be just ahead. And the reason has less to do with how many fires are burning right now, and everything to do with what's happening underground, in the atmosphere, and in forests that haven't burned in decades. To understand why experts are worried about what comes next, you first have to understand what makes this crisis different from the wildfire seasons of the past. Canada's boreal forest is one of the largest continuous forest systems on Earth, and for most of the last century, it burned the way forests are supposed to burn. In a slow, rotating cycle, patches igniting every few decades, clearing dead material, resetting the landscape, then growing back over the following years. That cycle depended on a delicate balance of moisture, temperature, and time. That balance has been breaking down for years, and the last several fire seasons have shown just how far it's shifted. Fires aren't just more frequent anymore. They're burning hotter, spreading faster, and in many cases refusing to fully go out. That last part is the detail fire scientists keep coming back to, because it's the one driving the warning about what's coming next. Deep in the peat and root systems of the boreal forest, fires can smolder underground through the winter, beneath snow cover, essentially hibernating rather than dying. Researchers have a name for these: zombie fires. They don't need oxygen the way a surface fire does. They burn slow, low, and largely invisible, consuming carbon-rich peat that can be meters deep, and then in spring, when conditions warm and dry out again, they can resurface and ignite the surrounding forest without a single new lightning strike or human spark required. Monitoring teams using satellite heat detection have identified holdover fire activity carrying over from previous seasons at levels far beyond what historical records would predict. That means this year's fire season doesn't start from zero. It starts with ignition points already smoldering, waiting for the right conditions. And the conditions are lining up in a way that has emergency planners on edge. Snowpack across key fire-prone provinces has been below historical averages heading into the season, which matters more than it sounds. Snowpack isn't just about winter recreation. It's the reservoir that keeps forest floors moist deep into summer, buying time before vegetation dries out enough to become dangerously flammable. Thinner snowpack means that buffer disappears earlier. Combine that with long-range forecasts pointing toward another season of above-average heat and below-average precipitation across the same regions already carrying holdover fire activity, and you get a scenario fire agencies describe using a term usually reserved for the most extreme years on record: compound risk. Not one factor driving danger, but 3 or 4 stacking on top of each other at the same time. Here's where the story gets more urgent and more specific. Fire behavior analysts aren't just worried about more fires. They're worried about a particular kind of fire event: the pyroconvective fire, sometimes called a fire-generated thunderstorm. When a wildfire burns hot enough and fast enough, it can create its own weather system. The intense heat sends a column of smoke and hot air rushing upwards so violently that it forms a cloud, technically called a pyrocumulonimbus, that behaves like a supercell thunderstorm. These firestorms can generate their own lightning, which can spark entirely new fires miles away from the original blaze, and their turbulent winds can cause a fire to explode in size and unpredictability within minutes, catching even experienced fire crews off guard. Canada has already recorded a rising number of these pyroconvective events in recent fire seasons, and researchers tracking atmospheric conditions say the ingredients for more of them: dry fuel, extreme heat, unstable air, are exactly what's forecast to intensify in the coming weeks. This is the part where the danger stops being an abstract climate statistic and becomes something that reaches directly into daily life, even for people who live nowhere near a forest. Smoke from Canadian wildfires doesn't respect borders. Previous seasons have already demonstrated that plumes can travel deep into the United States, pushing air quality index readings in major cities into hazardous territory, grounding flights, closing schools, and sending vulnerable populations to emergency rooms with respiratory distress. If this season does escalate the way current monitoring suggests it could, the smoke exposure isn't a regional inconvenience. It's a public health event that can stretch across an entire continent for weeks at a time. Emergency management officials are trying to walk a difficult line in how they communicate this. They don't want to cause panic over a season that hasn't fully unfolded yet, but they also don't want a repeat of past years where warning signs were visible in the data well before evacuation orders had to be issued on short notice. What's changed this year is the tone. Statements that once focused on preparedness and readiness are now explicitly naming the possibility of a season that could exceed recent record-breaking years. a level of directness that fire agencies typically avoid until the risk picture is unusually clear. Part of what makes this moment feel different is the timing. Historically, the most dangerous stretch of a Canadian fire season hits in the mid to late summer window when accumulated heat, dried out vegetation, and reduced humidity converge. But with holdover fires already active and snowpack deficits already established this early, experts are warning that the danger curve could arrive sooner and climb higher than the historical pattern would suggest. In other words, the phase communities usually brace for in August could show up in June or July instead, catching response systems and residents without the lead time they're used to having. There's also a resource question underneath all of this that doesn't get as much attention as it should. Firefighting capacity, aircraft, crews, equipment isn't infinite, and it's shared across provinces and, in extreme seasons, across international borders through mutual aid agreements. When multiple large fires ignite simultaneously across different regions, agencies are forced into triage, prioritizing which communities get resources first based on immediate threat to life. Fire seasons that produce this kind of simultaneous, widespread ignition put enormous strain on a system that's already operating near capacity in a normal year. If this season does escalate the way the current indicators suggest, officials are warning that the mutual aid system itself could be tested in ways it hasn't been before. None of this means catastrophe is guaranteed. Weather patterns can still shift. A wetter-than-forecast stretch could ease the driest conditions before peak season arrives. Fire scientists are careful to frame this as risk, not prophecy. But they're also clear that the indicators lining up right now, the holdover fires, the snowpack deficit, the long-range heat and dryness forecasts, the rising pyroconvective activity, are not indicators anyone wants to see stacking together at the same time. It's the combination, not any single factor, that has turned routine seasonal monitoring into something closer to an early warning. For now, monitoring agencies are watching the data feed in day by day. Satellite heat signatures, soil moisture readings, long-range atmospheric models, looking for the signal that tells them whether this season breaks toward relief or toward record territory. What they're not doing is waiting until the fires are visible to start preparing. Because if the pattern holds the way it's trending right now, the visible fires may only be the opening stage of a season experts increasingly believe is building towards something far more dangerous still to come.